Kelly Wagonworth. I'm a consultant. I work on land conservation and program development, and I'm providing some support.
I'm Krista Carlson. I'm from Thetford, and I'm representing Conservation Commission.
Tracy Shao. I'm President and CEO of Vermont Land Trust. I live in St. Johnsbury.
I'm Emily Alger. I work with the Center for Whole Communities. I live in Heinsberg, where I'm also on the planning commission.
I'm Nick Bennett. I'm the chair of the Vermont Trails and Greenways Council. I'm also the executive director of the Vermont Mountain Bike Association. Came down from Waterbury.
Thank you all. And we do have these speakers or these microphones kind of along, there's a daisy chain around the room. So I'm seeing in the chat that there are folks sitting in the back having a hard time picking up on the mic. So we'll just be conscious of that as we move through the rest of the day. And I know we do have some TAC members on Zoom. So if you are a member of the TAC, would you please introduce yourself to the group as well? And maybe we can start with Rich.
So we, for sure, Kwa MZW, and Delawizi, Lisal, and Dai Wantastikak, Dalisukwakik. I'm called Rich Holshoe. I'm down the river in Brattleboro, representing for Vermont Commission on Native American Affairs. I had hoped to be there in person, but things have changed and I'm online and probably only for part of the meeting. But thank you.
Thanks, Rich. Maybe Greg.
Good morning, everyone. This is Greg Gustina with the U.S. Forest Service. I'm in Mendon, Vermont.
Chris.
Hello, this is Chris Castano. I'm with Maine Woods Company in Portage Lake, Maine.
And Oliver.
Morning, I'm Oliver Pearson, the director of the Division of Forests within Vermont Forest Parks and Recreation.
Great. Well, thank you all again for being here. Thanks for anyone attending to listen in or provide comment today. We're really glad to have this group gathered. We're going to start things off today with kind of an introduction from our executive director at VCP, Gus Seelig. And after that, we'll kind of go into a kickoff exercise here together. But Gus, would you like to take it away?
Sure. Well, thanks everybody for being here today. This has been a challenging endeavor that we've all been involved in. And possibly we should not be surprised. The state failed twice to pass legislation to create a state land use plan. And human beings have lots of opinions about almost everything under the sun. We are today saying we're going to shift facilitation from what it's been to VHCB staff. We've been talking with a number of stakeholders, some on the TAC, some from the public, about the need for better communication and better listening. And so taking on the facilitation, which Annie will lead today, is a part of that effort. As we proceed today, I wanted to make a couple comments about the process and the many partners and the value of this process, which for VHCB has already resulted in a number of changes. So long before we decide on a report, we've made capacity investments in new partners, including new stewardship partners. We've made more investments overall in stewardship at a number of organizations. We've moved to holding more easements ourselves to relieve burdens. We've created a new fund after a meeting with Coverts a little over a year ago to enhance the donation of private easements for those who can't afford the full cost of doing that. But I also want to acknowledge that we are in a very different time than when Act 59 was first introduced as a possibility and then passed after similar legislation was vetoed. And it's both a different time in terms of policy and a different time in terms of funding. The Inflation Reduction Act, which we hoped would deliver lots of resources through Forest Legacy, through community forestry, through ASIP-ALE, through the Land and Water Conservation Fund, is in full retreat. State budgets, which produced a $10 million surplus that was allocated to conservation funding, are likely to go away in the next year. So we're in a more resource-constrained environment. And as, at least as I do my job, the issue of housing at the State House has become paramount one for almost everybody, to the extent that I regularly get asked, why are we spending any money on conservation right now? And I think there's really good answers to that question. But it is a question that people should know is being asked. A bunch of us, including Jamie, Don from VLT, Nancy Patch, we're all at Regional Conservation Partnership Conference last week at UMass. I think they're in their 15th year. And this year's real focus, and Jamie closed the show, was on the need to figure out how to do housing and conservation together, which was, I think, a very different focus for that group. And it got me thinking about our founding and the beginning of the state spending money on conservation at all back in the 1980s. And the people who really taught me what this business was all about. And a conversation I had in my first year when I really came to this work with a background in community development, background in housing, background in conservation, but not in conservation. And I was meeting with Molly Beatty, who's then the Forest and Parks Commissioner for the state. She was, for me, the most inspirational environmental leader I ever have had the good fortune to work with. And long before we had words like biodiversity in common use, or we were talking about global warming, we didn't have that term then, certainly didn't have climate change. We talked about the fact that, and she said, we're living at the time where we have the greatest rate of extinction of species known to humankind in recorded history. And we don't know why, but we're not trying to save the planet, because what we really want to do is figure out what's killing all those species, because they may kill us too, whatever those things are. So she said, we're trying to save humanity. And I think that goes to a dinner I had with a couple of her co-founding board members this year, of the need for a big holistic vision about this. I've had a couple conversations with people who've said biodiversity is the most important thing. This issue is much more narrow than VHCB's mission. And I agree that biodiversity is absolutely critical. It's a big part of our work. It needs to become a bigger part. Restoration needs to be a bigger part of our work. Quality with which we do our work needs to get bigger. But I don't think we're going to get where we need to go without what I've always thought of as a big tent of support. And that's reflected, I think, in the VHCB statute, but I think it's also a reality that the more we can figure out how we all do this work together. I think about Connie Monaco when we were working on the Champion Lands deal, saying in the well of the House at a big public hearing, we can't do everything on every acre, but there can be an acre for every need. And that included biodiversity, included forest products industry, included, from his perspective, the need to respect indigenous communities, though that was not a front and center issue at that moment. It included the issue of equity. And all those things are wrapped into Act 59 one way or another. So as Annie leads us through this first exercise, I think we just all have to think about not what our little piece of any issue is, but how do we support each other in all those issues to have a better Vermont, to have a Vermont that is focused on both rural communities and urban communities and community vitality and quality of life, and the importance of biodiversity in that, because we will not be sustainable without paying attention to that. And I think that's why Act 59 came forth. It came forth with a broad charge that it gave us. So I don't want to diminish any piece of anybody's agenda and their focus. I just want to make a personal plea as we reflect on both possibilities of Act 59 and the tensions. And a bunch of you have given us great feedback on the tensions in the law that we just need to figure out moving forward. How do we create a sense that this is really important to Vermont to do this right? It's not going to happen nearly as fast as we might have envisioned when Act 59 passed, just because of retreat of the federal government. But I think we all share a common commitment to a whole bunch of values that are really overlapping. And I hope as we proceed, we can do that better than we have up to now. So I'm going to stop there, turn it back to Annie to lead us through this exercise.
Thank you so much, Gus. Thank you for that. And thank you for kind of regrounding us in the work and what we're here to do. And as Gus shared, you'll see some changes in how the TAC meetings will kind of function moving forward. We want to do a lot more listening and collaborative work together. And that's really our hope today for a number of different exercises we've kind of prepared and outlined. But we'd really like to kick things off taking a big step back together as a group and collectively talking through as individual TAC members, but representing communities and organizations, what is your vision for ultimately what this conservation plan is and what will result from this Vermont conservation plan? We have a worksheet actually that we're going to hand out and encourage everyone. There's a few questions on here. I'll walk through them, but we really want TAC members and the public who's here in attendance. I think these are really good questions to think about and reflect on. But we want everyone to take about 10 minutes to sit with these questions, jot down some notes, and then we'll share out as a group. But we're really inviting the TAC to think about if you're optimistic about the conservation plan, what do you imagine it can accomplish for Vermont, for communities that you represent? What would it look like if the plan really meets its vision and goals for your work, for your organizations, for communities that you serve? And what do you hope this plan makes possible? And if you're not feeling optimistic about those things, share that as well. But we really are hoping to use this as a collective opportunity to envision what could be possible as a result of this Vermont conservation plan. So we'll give everyone like 7 to 10 minutes and pick back up around a little before 10.
And for folks online, I think Gunnar has put into the chat those 3 questions.
Yes, he has.
Feel free, TAC members, if it's easier for you to type responses into the chat, Gunnar can collect those. And same thing in the room, if you want to give us your worksheet when you're done, we'd love to collect them, but also we want you to use it for the kind of the feedback, so you don't need to hand in your homework.
Right. Yeah, there will be an opportunity to share out after this as a group. And while this is a TAC exercise, we have public comment up next, and we encourage the public to reflect on this question and provide any comment they'd like during that time, but also if you wanted to share out where you land on this question, that would be great too. Getting away. We'll just take a couple more minutes. Welcome. Please take a seat. Oh, working on, and I'm just about wrapping up on exercise. Isaac's going to share. About ready? Good? Okay. All right. Well, before we start sharing out, I have another TAC member who just joined us. Kate, would you like to take a minute to just introduce yourself?
Hi, everybody. Kate Moore, Executive Director of Vermont Association.
Thank you for being here. Yeah. So we're going to take a few minutes now, probably about 15 minutes, to have the TAC just share out what came up as you were working through this exercise. Isaac is going to take notes for us up here at the front, so we can kind of collect what we're hearing from everyone. All right, so have these questions. Would anyone like to share out kind of what came up for them based on these prompts? You know, I saw everyone writing diligently, and we do have some TAC members who have already shared some notes in the chat, so we could start there if we wanted to. Rich, I see you've dropped some notes. Not everyone can see the chat in the room, but I appreciate you sharing, and we've collected those. But would you like to start us off?
Sure, I'd be happy to read this out loud and answer any questions if anyone has any, or elaborate, or maybe it speaks for itself. Coming from the community that I represent, and I will clarify that the community is not just the Vermont Commission on Native American Affairs, but we feel that we can share our voice on behalf of the land and our other than human relatives, because somebody needs to say it. So I stated here, I am cautiously optimistic regarding the Vermont Conservation Plan because of the opportunities that it represents, and the caution derives from recognition that it is a legal instrument. It's Vermont state law embedded in Western property and rights-based law, which is precisely the paradigm that has led us to this challenging moment where we have to, tackle what's in front of us. I see this undertaking as an exercise in recognizing that quandary and shifting to the degree that we are able within that system, because it's going to limit us. Shifting the conversation toward more equitable and holistic approaches, and certainly this will better center the values and understandings of earth-based traditional cultures and place-specific to this landscape. And if that doesn't make any sense, I completely understand, because I'm coming from a really different place. And I hope that we can bring some much needed change here. And I think Vermont is well positioned as a small state, maybe a little more nimble and a little more empathetic with these ideals. So thank you. Willie Winnie.
Thank you, Rich.
I'm gonna try reflecting that.
Sure. I'm hearing that cautiously optimistic that this plan could be an opportunity to maybe shift more towards an equitable and earth-based approach to conservation and a lot of the kind of intersectional components that are included in Act 59. And that, you know, we have an opportunity as a smaller state to be nimble, and there's opportunity there. It's great. Thank you.
And I might just add what I heard, Rich, and here, look, there are limitations of operating within this property rights system, but that we can move towards, you know, the more holistic vision. I'm not going to try to restate sort of what you said at the end there, but there's opportunities to move in a direction despite the fact that we're operating within this system.
Yes. Thank you.
Thank you, Rich. Okay. Maybe someone in the room would like to share next. I know you all have some great ideas. Amy, yeah, please.
So I'm optimistic that the plan can develop a set of strategies to meet the goals of Act 59, which do have a biodiversity benefit. There's a focus there, and there's also a broader vision in the Act, and I see them as operating in parallel. That there's two opportunities there for them to come together and promote conservation for many diverse values. So I'm optimistic that we can look at this, I guess, to your Big Tent proposition, Gus, that there's room in the Act 59 plan to have certain very specific strategies for conservation that benefits biodiversity, and then broader strategies. And benefiting biodiversity has a lot of values for a lot. And then we can also look at the vision and understand that there's other conservation desires beyond just biodiversity, working with willing landowners, and that, you know, that can relate to food security. It can relate to so many values that we have that comes with conserving land, and that we can do this try to do this in an equitable way, exploring system that Rich was saying that we have, and improvements to address that, while now acknowledging that we have other priorities right now, like housing, land use priorities in the state right now that we're trying to tackle all at the same time.
So cautious optimist, or not cautious actually, optimistic that we can find a path to uplifting all of the values, centering conservation is sort of what I was hearing a little bit, and maybe I was reading too much between the lines, but does that accurately reflect our
Centering conservation and having specific strategies that are related to the goals and biodiversity, but having a whole suite of other conservation strategies too that pick up on the vision and other values that come with conserving land too.
Yeah, it'd be an opportunity to have actions that are very specific, but also an opportunity to capture some of the broader themes, and that we can do both.
Yes. Yep.
Yeah. That's great. Thank you. Tracy?
Yeah, so speaking with the perspective of Vermont Land Trust, who's, you know, a leader in durable land protection in the state. But based on our almost 50 years of work, you know, we've increasingly recognized that while we continue to be really active in durable land protection, access, affordability, restoration, education, inspiration, sustainability, and stewardship are absolutely critical to the success of that durable land protection, and to ensure that it benefits as many people as possible from an equity standpoint, and also just equity. So, you know, what we've been optimistic about is that, you know, this plan could bring that bigger tent of folks working on all those issues that really connect with each other, and we need each other to be successful and to develop, use our current tools, make them better, and add to them, add tools and strategies, and more people to the effort. So I continue to be optimistic that we can do that, as hard as it's been. And I appreciate some of the remarks Gus made around, we each come from a community and we need to speak for them. And if we aren't all listening to each other and like really thinking about how to be collaborative to move that forward, the whole thing just falls apart, I think, at a time where there's a lot of pressures on our landscape.
I feel about what Tracy said, and linking back to what Gus said too. I'm optimistic and excited about the potential for this as an opportunity to really engage people, to get people involved and excited about conservation, the potential it holds, really something that moves away from conservation being done to them, even away from conservation being done for them, conservation being done with them, connecting people with landscapes to both enjoy them, but then also creating genuine empathy and understanding about the need to preserve certain areas where we need to focus on ecological preservation, keep people away, but bring people to other areas where they can enjoy that, get people excited about that aspect, foster an understanding of where working lands, how that all fits in. It feels like we have a huge opportunity, and I've been really excited and optimistic, even as the plan is taking shape, to see that really be connected to. And so I'm optimistic that we get to a spot where, as much as we have these kind of goal areas that are in separate buckets, they're not separate. They're all woven together, and we're not thinking like people get to play here and we're going to protect things for flora and fauna here. It's all part of the big picture. Yes, there are areas where we need to emphasize not everything can be everywhere. There has to be a place for everything, but just moving away from sort of cordoning off areas of Vermont, but thinking about how we think of a big picture, just where people at the end of this are just like really excited, and because we're going to need that from a funding standpoint, from a public support standpoint. So I'm optimistic that we can get there.
Thank you.
Nice to hear that we're all having like very similar thoughts around these prompts. Similarly, I was thinking of that I'm optimistic that this plan can help us preserve the land base for our many conservation needs, that traditional land protection tools are a tool to protect different opportunities upon the land. Gus, your quote from Connie of, we can't do everything on every acre, but we can have an acre for every need. I think this plan represents an opportunity to do that and to do it thoughtfully, to ensure that it's not just an acre for every need, but it's the right amount of acreage for every need, that we're preserving the space that biodiversity needs, that our agricultural production needs, our working forest lands, our recreation, our communities. So really looking at science and to our community needs for coming up with an understanding of what each of those needs and the space those needs require, and how we can implement that across the landscape. Building on a couple other thoughts that other people raised as well, I think increasing support, I'm optimistic that this plan can be a way to increase support for conservation around the state, and for additional funding and increasing the pace of land protection. I think both of those things are going to be needed if we are to truly achieve the vision and the goals of Act 59. And Tracy talked about the need for new innovation and tools and approaches to conservation. I think that's critical as well. I'm optimistic that we can get there. And I think if we are, again, to truly meet the vision and goals, we're going to need that.
Appreciate it. I'm just saying, I'm not going to be able to boil these comments down.
We're recording it.
Yes.
We're recording. We're taking notes.
And we'll collect your worksheets if you want them when we take a break in about 20 minutes.
And we'll continue to reflect.
I was an 8th grade teacher, so I can read all handwriting.
I would just build on that. I appreciate it's great kind of able to kind of reflect on the comments that have been shared. And so I feel like, Tracy, ditto, I think a lot of what you said, and the image that keeps popping in my head in terms of trying to capture these notes, that diagram, right? With the idea of like one circle focused on societal needs, right? Folks recognizing the benefit of our forest provides for a whole variety of different values and benefits, right? We have sort of the old traditional Venn diagram model of societal, social benefits, environmental benefits, and economic benefits. And I think for me, in being a part of this process, thinking about what my vision for the plan would look like would be that would hit that sweet spot, right? I mean, I think one of the things I just reflecting back, what I hear is that when we're thinking about conservation, we need to be thinking about the environmental benefits, the social benefits, and the economic benefits. And within that, as a small nonprofit that works with landowners around the state, I think one of my specific hopes is that this process and this plan really brings new and improved resources to help landowners think about opportunities as it relates to conservation decisions, but also understanding kind of how, and sort of reflecting back on the conservation community, about how conservation impacts and supports our forest economy here in the state. When I look at our forested landscape, I think as I was driving in this morning, I kept thinking to myself, for better or worse, right? And I know, we're not going to wax on poetically about our land use history here in Vermont, but for better or worse, I think, I need to reflect on the fact that stewardship of our landscape here in Vermont, has in some respects already concerning some of our forested areas. The fact that we're 80% forested is a reflection of kind of that past relationship to the forest, good or bad. And I recognize it's not all rosy, right? I mean, there's a lot to reflect on there, but the past stewardship of our landscape, I think, has presented us with this opportunity of how we move forward. And within that context, I think recognizing that our communities around the state, there's a really strong relationship with our forests, and that allowing stewardship to be a part of that equation, part of that tool base for how we move forward is really, really important to not only honor those relationships, but also honor that work that has been done, previous to us, right? We always talk about it being not our forest, but our turn. The work of past stewards, past landowners caring for our forests. So again, probably that wasn't super articulate, but I think that's kind of my vision is let's try to get there and kind of honor that and honor the variety of perspectives that have been shared today. And I think also those values that are reflected in our forest landscape, with a plan that not only, again, to kind of reflect on your comment, not only addresses the challenges that we face today, but also the other thought that I was having as I was driving in is, how do we create opportunity for our grandkids and our great grandkids and our great great grandkids, right? How do we provide them with the opportunity to steward and care for the land, and not necessarily limit all of their options? And I think that there's a really fine balance that I know we're probably not going to get to in just one plan, but I think it's something that we should all be thinking about because we are not the first ones, obviously, to care for this land. And I think we should be thinking about how do we set it up for all those future generations to be able to have a connection and relationship with our forests here in Vermont.
Thank you, Kate. I thought that was all very articulate. We are still hearing on the chat that it's a little hard to hear us. So if everyone can just be conscious of projecting, these little black circles are the speakers. So I'll take a look during a break too.
Oliver or Greg, do you have anything you want to add before we reflect back, or anybody who hasn't had a chance in the room? Emily.
So Oliver and then Emily.
Yeah, I made a comment on the second question, so I can hold that if we're still focusing on the first question, or jump in whatever you prefer.
No,
go ahead.
It's all up for grabs, please.
Great. So I think the hard part with this comment is I think Gus's opening remarks were great, and the optimism I feel is somewhat tempered by just the fact that, as Gus pointed out, the situation we're in today is different from when Act 59 was passed. So the point I wanted to make regarding, question number 2, what would it look like if the plan truly meets its vision and goals for the work that we do, is that if the plan was successful there, conserving all this land permanently would be accompanied by increased capacity for conservation organizations statewide of all sorts to manage and steward the lands that are being permanently conserved. I think Gannon touched on this as well. Getting to 30% permanently conserved by 2030 or whatever will add tens of thousands of acres to the network of permanently conserved lands statewide, so some of which are already, needing, some additional capacity to appropriately manage them. And my hope is that this effort will be accompanied by the identification and the securing the resources to steward those lands, for the benefit of all Vermonters and our visitors who use those lands, enjoy those lands, or just want to know that those lands are there as conserved. I think I recognize that some categories within Act 59 will need less management, such as ecological reserves, but some will need more, such as the natural resource management areas. And I think for me, getting the 30% conserved is almost, an important step in the process, but in making sure that effort is accompanied by full recognition of the resources required to appropriately manage those lands is an important piece of it as well. So that's my thoughts on question number 2. It was nice to see that addressed in some of the documents that the TAC has produced to date. I'm a little, as I said in my opening remarks, I'm concerned that that our today's funding picture, policy picture might make it harder, but hoping that the pendulum always swings back and forth, and hoping we can wait till the pendulum swings in the other direction and take advantage of that openness for conservation and mobilizing resources to do it, to secure what we need. So I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you, Oliver.
Hey, y'all. I'll be honest, I'm not actually feeling very optimistic. And I think that the reason that I want to bring that to the table is perhaps that I'm representing an organization who's actually more focused on the process than on the product. And those are both different things. And we're all in the room to address different pieces of the implementation of Act 59. And I think to date, I've had a lot of concerns about the process of this, and I guess I want to say that I want to say this. The process is held by a system that doesn't work for a lot of people, and we're all operating in that system, and it works in different ways for us. And so I will appreciate VHCB making the decision to change the facilitation of this process. I think it's a really important, good decision. And want to also name how painful it was for me to witness that it took 6 months for that facilitation to change. And so when I look at that and say, okay, that's the system operating, the big system operating, I'm really concerned that as we try to live into the values that each of us is bringing to the table, and I'm loving the opportunity to hear the values that each of you is bringing to the table, it's so beautiful. As we try to live into that, working against a system that is big and powerful at a time when each of us is feeling under enormous pressure and enormous threat, whether for our organizations, our families, or our communities, is going to be really, really hard. And so I'm not feeling optimistic, and I want to say that with love. I think that's going to be a really hard job for us, and my optimistic dream for this process is that we can show up for the hard process, and we can lean into those values, and we can bring the skills that many of us have been working on for a long time to bear in changing those systems. That's my dream. There's good stuff in this policy, and I want to see us live into the values and the dream of that. And I'm definitely very aware of some of the folks who are not in the room today, and the impacts that this process has had on some of them. And I don't know why they're not in the room. I'm guessing that they're at the Verda gathering. But I do suddenly want to look, gosh, they're not in the room, and they're a really important voice, and we're all here in the room together. And what does that mean? Is that the system working? to mute those voices. So I just think we have some really, really hard work in front of us in terms of process. Even though I know that amongst us, we have the skills for like a really good conservation outcomes product. But are we addressing the equity dreams that we hold? So.
Thank you. Thank you for that, Emily. I know, those are hard comments to share and hard feedback to share, and I really appreciate you bringing that to the table today. And that is something we have been working on and grappling with. And thank you also for bringing up the point that I meant to include in the introduction, that about half of the TAC members are not present today because there are many other competing events also happening today. And we went back and forth a lot on, do we still carry forward with this meeting? We decided, yes, we should, but we have been in touch and in contact with a lot of other TAC members while making that decision. Thank you for bringing that up, for your comments and that note. Thank you. We are running a little behind schedule, but I do think this is really important, and I would encourage, I think there are a few TAC members who have yet to share out, and I'd really love to hear from them if they are comfortable sharing. So I look to the group to give the thumbs up on, great, let's flex that schedule. Yeah, ready to share? Oh, sorry.
I'm like, I don't have anything additive at this point.
Okay, great.
That's what I meant.
Okay, great. That's great. Thank you. Greg, would you like to share out?
Hey, good morning. I didn't have, like, I just had kind of one sentence responses to the questions, and what I've been hearing is really good to hear. I actually, after Gus mentioned Molly Beatty, I kind of looked up Molly Beatty because I recognized the name, and did some great things that were probably really hard to do. And that's how I see, one of the things that I think I'm focused maybe on the last question here that I think could be really good is connectivity across the landscape. I know that came up in a few of the meetings, and conservation opportunities and communities can really help connect with larger chunks or larger blocks of conserved land. And I think that that's a real good potential here. I also think that affording local communities to give comments on conservation, what they would like to conserve in their communities, is really important, and could really help in the long run. So just a few comments there, but I really appreciate what I've been hearing from everyone else. It's been really good.
Thank you so much, Greg, for that. We also have Chris, who is on Zoom, but has had to leave the meeting a couple times because of power issues at home, and I'm not seeing him right now.
I see him right now, yeah.
So that's where Chris is. I think we've heard from everyone. Does anybody
want to respond to anybody else on the TAC before I'm going to switch this up to allow some feedback from members of the public?
Yeah, I think, Gus, would you like to kind of close us out of this session or this part of the agenda?
I guess I will just say that I appreciate concern about how systems need to change as a big part of all of our work. I think that's an ongoing thing. We have 8 months to finish a report. We don't have 8 months to finish the work. I think that the report, the process will launch us into more work that is going to need to be done in the ongoing years. And I think we're committed to doing that work. I've heard a lot this morning about stewardship, about management, about equity, that are all things that I'm not sure I'm sure we can make progress on all of them. I'm sure we can't fully answer the question of equity because it's been with us for so long. I was having conversations with Deb Brighton, who is a forester by training and who's the first director of the current use program, about how do we define forest ownership 30 years ago. And we still have not figured out how to deal with what we all inherit as a landscape and what we've all experienced over the last 5 years as people with lots of wealth have moved to Vermont. And it's really important for us to think about the issues of equity and access. So that's fundamental to what I think is going to be ongoing work that's going to stretch well beyond what even the great ideas that we might imagine that will improve access, improve who owns the landscape today. We're going to be thinking about that for years to come, because we do have a system where wealth gets to determine lots of stuff, and how on the public end we engage with that reality to come up with common values is just going to be an ongoing challenge. So I think we have to acknowledge we will not finish many of these issues by issuing a report for Act 59, but we have to continue to struggle with them and work on them and chip away at them. But we should try as best we can in the coming months to address them and make some more progress than we have to date.
Thank you, Ms.
And completely agree with the thoughts about, the need for stewardship and resource management and restoration as a part of what we bring back to General Assembly when we get done with this.
Thank you, Gus, and thank you all for sharing out and engaging in that exercise with us. I think it's really, really great to hear where everyone is landing today and hear everyone's voices. So I think we will move on to our next agenda item.
We're going to take 10, if you've been following on the agenda, we're about 10 minutes behind. I want to take the next 10 minutes this is the first of 2 opportunities for public comment. So I see a hand from Carolyn. If other people who would like to make a comment now could raise their hand, I just want to make sure we give people the right amount of time, but enough time for everybody who wants to comment. So Carolyn, is there anybody else online? I know Zach's raised his hand here in the room. Well, Carolyn, why don't we let you start us off, please, and take 2 or 3 minutes. Somebody might want to join in, even though only you and Zach have raised your hands. Maybe try to leave space for a 3rd or 4th person if they'd like to talk.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you. Good morning, everybody. My name is Caroline Sherman Gordon. I use she, her pronouns. I'm the Legislative Director of Rural Vermont, and I've been an active stakeholder in the Agricultural Working Lands Working Group that was subject to the inventory phase of this process. We have not been invited to be one of the few privileged TAC committee members. To my knowledge, this is the first public meeting of this body. That might explain why there's so little presence of the public in this room. Maybe it was public before, maybe it has to do with all the various shifting communication tools and websites this process is using that might have diluted the picture of what of this part of the meetings was public and not. I guess my comment is about the amendment of the agenda. I see that the new agenda didn't include critical items that members of the public were interested in hearing about today, namely that VHCB would offer A, an update on stakeholder engagement, and B, its recommended approach towards an equity framework and engagement. In terms of holistic approaches, for agricultural land use and local self-reliance / food security goals. To me, it's clear that, currently neither regional planning nor Act 250 reform nor this Act 59 process center any of the needs that food producers would center in protecting the farmland for development, as well as making farmland more affordable to farmers. I'm not sure if any representative that can speak to the needs of the agricultural community is engaged in this particular team that is meeting here today. And anyhow, my questions are the following. Why were the explicit agenda items I mentioned were taken off of this agenda prior to this meeting? Seems like relevant discussion about public engagement got replaced with minutes of silence. Secondly, how many complaints did the organizers of Act 59 receive from the public in total since the beginning of the inventory phase regarding shortfalls in public participation? That would be important public information to have. Third, I wonder who the TAC committee members are and how they have been chosen. I don't think that information is online. I didn't hear anyone in the room introduce themselves except one person that was not able to be really heard audibly. And then I wonder if any of VHCB's new stewardship partners are invested in the development of carbon markets. We as a farmer-led organization dismiss the term legal land steward. And lastly, I wonder if VHCB has been undertaken an economic analysis of the choice to recommend achieving the goal of 50 by 50 through the acquisition of land development rights, and how such a scenario would impact the housing price inflation. And maybe lastly, just a comment, because I'm following the discussion, I don't think that any farmer-led organization desires this body to also think beyond land acquisition or the conservation theme and how to protect farmland from development, making it more affordable, also into the sphere of economically equipping farmers to do their business and become good land stewards and those resources. Those, I think, are other buckets where the public needs to invest differently and where the legal land stewards should not be granted more autonomy in lieu of granting that same autonomy to the actual land stewards. Thank you.
Thanks, Carolyn. Zach, you want to come up to, yeah. Move the daisy chain closer.
How are we doing on time for the session?
We have about 5 more minutes, and it doesn't look like anybody else wants to make a comment yet, so.
I was just going to say, if anyone online does want to give comment and can't figure out how to raise their hand, which has certainly happened to me in a Zoom meeting before, you can just put that in the chat too, and we'll make sure you get a chance.
When there's no other comments, maybe there's 5 minutes time for responses too.
No, there is another comment right now, and so we're going to hand it over to Zach.
Well, thanks for having this meeting today, for inviting the public to participate for the changes. I believe that I don't know the details of, but that it's seem apparent in facilitation today, and that means a lot. Really appreciate that. I should start off by saying I'm Zach Porter. I'm the executive director of Standing Trees, which is an organization based here in Montpelier, work around New England, management of public lands, state and federal public lands. And we were involved in the drafting and the pushing for the passage of Act 59. It's great to see all of you face to face. Appreciate the work that this committee's been doing. And I wanted to, I'll try to keep it brief. In order to keep it brief, I guess starting question that I have is, tomorrow is a deadline for public comments on the draft framework report, is my understanding. And one thing that I wanted to ask is how those more detailed public comments will be shared with the TAC, so that, of course, during a 5-minute comment or less, you can't share that much detail. But I do hope that members of the TAC will be able to access and will take the time, I hope, to read through the hopefully really great comments that you'll receive from people who have spoken today. I also want to back up a second and say thank you to Caroline for your insightful comments just a moment ago. I think just to keep this brief for now and to save most of my more substantive comments for what I'll submit tomorrow or whenever the deadline is for that framework comment period, I want to just mention that there are 2 things that have stood out to me in the conversations that have happened since the last TAC meeting, when the public was first allowed to watch, and today, which is, number one, there is clearly a deep desire for and a need for really robust dialogue. The word tension came out again this morning. I think perhaps Gus mentioned the word tension, I think, or it came up earlier. And that's, a word that was spoken, I believe, at the previous TAC meeting. Or was mentioned in a meeting hosted by, I think, the Land Access and Opportunity Board subsequent to the last TAC meeting. I think it's so important for us to make time to dig into those tensions. And I think it's also important to acknowledge that and I think this speaks to something that Gus said, that the timelines for being able to really grapple with those tensions and the timeline for completing the Act 59 conservation plan may not be the same. In fact, they're probably not the same. and we can hopefully get at some of these systemic, bigger systemic issues, questions through that deeper grappling that will hopefully go on for a long time. I hope this is a catalyst for those kinds of conversations, resetting the discussion. I also hope that in the time that we have to finish the conservation plan, that we will have much more robust conversations like the one that are going on right here, and also really rise to the occasion and meet the intent of the law, which has a lot of important content in it that hasn't been also dealt with, I think, appropriately in the conservation, in the inventory, and in the kind of outline for the conservation plan as we read it to date. So kind of two big buckets there, I guess. You know, the long-term big picture work, and really refocusing on that ecologically functional landscape that is the goal of Act 59, kind of moving Vermont conservation design into action. I'll just add one more thing, then I'll stop because I want to make sure there's time for other folks. I also saw on the website a point about regional stakeholder groups. It says that meetings happened over the summer and that they may be happening in the future. I don't believe I've heard about any actual regional stakeholder group meetings, however. And I just want to flag that as another topic of interest and curiosity, because we certainly would like to participate in one and invite other people to participate in them, but we don't know anything about them. And I think I'll just stop there. So thank you again for that.
Well, thank you, Zach. Is there anybody else online? We're just about out of time in this portion of public comment. We're going to have more at 12:20, so we're going to come back to this after we've had more discussion and give more chance to react. But I take one more quick comment if anybody wants to, including responding to the exercise. If not, I think we're not going to take the time in the meetings to respond to everything we hear. We are recording the meetings and taking notes. But I will, two quick, just ministerial responses are that, Carolyn, we'd be happy to help you orient to where everything is. I think a lot of the questions you asked, the information is posted, but I'd be happy to follow up with you and do a deep dive of where materials are. And Zach, we are going to extend the time for feedback on the draft framework report. So we've gotten some comments, about 7 or 8 comments received to date. We'd like to hear from lots of people in doing that. So we're gonna enlarge the time for that. And that's partly as we've shifted the facilitation. We've also, and we'll talk more about the schedule from here to the end of February later, but we're building in more time for the TAC to grapple now, and also for stakeholders to send us comments on that framework report, which was just a report. It was a point in time reflection. We're going to evolve the plan as we go. But having said that, I think today's agenda will make a lot of that more clear as we go through it. I want to give people, we'll start the next segment 5 minutes late, and I want to give a 5-minute break to people to get coffee and donuts up here, to use the restrooms, to get refresher coffee at home. But Zach, it sounded like you had a clarifying question. Yes, can we? Yeah, we'll come back to that and say that. I don't want to say it unless Annie has.
It'll be November 28th. We're extending to the last Friday of the month. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I didn't know the answer off the top of my head. So, all right. We'll pause the recording here for a minute, and then we're going to come back at 10:46. We ran about. We're going to get started again, and we ran about 10 minutes over there, which is great. And Isaac is going to walk us through the next exercise with help from Annie. We're going to try to finish this around 11:25. We're going to go right into the next exercise after that. So if people do need to get up for donuts, coffee, and restrooms, we've got a longer stretch here we're running through. After those two exercises, we will do more public comment, and then we'll break for people to grab their lunch, and we'll just do we've got a kind of open-ended Q&A and TAC member questions for the end of the meeting. So Isaac, you've got about a half an hour.
Okay, well, I'll be quick with the upfront comment. So we really appreciated the TAC members taking the time to fill out the attention survey that we sent out, and there was some really robust and great feedback that we received as a result. We want to take a little bit more time to sort of process that and consolidate it, and I think we'll have more conversations about tension points at future meetings. I think right now, what we want to talk about is one particular tension point, and that relates to the scope of the act. And so we've got a memo that sort of lays out the VHCB's sort of our thinking on the scope of the act as written, our interpretation of what the act requires of us as we write the plan, and sort of laying that out for you to think about. We've got some scope-related prompts for you to, again, do a similar exercise. So we're going to take, how much time are we taking to read and respond here?
Let's do this for eight to 10 minutes again.
Okay. So you'll have a bunch of time to read this first, and then do the discussion prompts. In this, we've got enough.
And for everyone on Zoom, I'm going to drop a link to a Google document that is the memo that Isaac's referring to. So you'll be able to read that memo. And then Gunnar will post the questions in the chat again. So that's what everyone's working on in the room. The memo and then the questions that everyone's reflecting on. And if anyone has trouble accessing any of this, please just let me know.
Folks, we're gonna wrap up the quiet time in a minute and then get to discussion.
I do still see some scribbling, but hopefully we can continue the conversation now and you can all get those thoughts out into the room.
Sorry to interrupt you, Isaac. Before we get started, we're still getting some feedback that people are having a hard time hearing on Zoom. So just be like super conscious of talking into the microphones.
Isaac, do you want to sit here right in front of?
I think I've got one close enough here.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Kate.
Appreciate it. So, curious to hear how that exercise landed with folks. I think any of the prompts are up for grabs. We don't need to go in order. If your head went somewhere where the prompts didn't provide space, that's welcome in the room as well. So is there anybody with some burning thoughts? What's on point? What's missing? Where does this fit into our prior conversation? Is it in alignment? How do we balance ambition and practicality? So, anybody feel like opening it up? I've been given the direction to give as much space as I humanly possibly could to that awkward silence. I know there was some scribbling out there, so I know people do have thoughts. I think it is sort of like, it's a lot to get your mind around and to think through. So I respect that people are maybe still deep in thought.
That's the question.
Yeah.
You have the scope of the question.
Yeah.
Which, I mean, it feels like, just to kind of hone on the attention point, is around just trying to paraphrase it correctly, like the scope of sort of tools and mechanisms that can be recommended or supported by the plan. It's less, I mean, there may be things missing in here, but the sort of scope of what this memo is looking at is what might the plan recommend, or how might it, what's the scope of sort of solution space?
Yeah.
Like, less around like, do we have a vision for where we're going? I mean, how broad should we take it?
That's a really good question.
Ask a question like, what's missing? Like,
Yeah.
there could be many things missing, but deliberately, because that's not intended enough.
Right. So I think, what we've been thinking about is we've been working on the broad objectives and the pathways underneath, and are looking forward to the actions that will be under those sort of broad pathways. And so the questions that we're grappling with internally, and that I think we'll be grappling with together at future meetings, are how do we draw boundaries around actions that are going to be a part of the plan and actions that might be like really great actions, but maybe not a part of the scope. And so I think that's sort of what we're laying out is, there are the goals of the act, which are, specifically focused on permanent conservation or 2050. There's the language that sort of broadens that to things that are legally durable. But then there is likely a bunch of conservation work occurring on the landscape. And we know there is, in the agricultural world, there's a lot of support for farmers that are non-perpetual outcomes. Same is true for forestry. Those are all important to the land use. And so I think that's sort of the grappling of where do you draw those lines? What's important, but maybe not a focus. Jamie.
So I think on that point, and I'm hoping that we can get some clarity on this because I think it'll help all of us. Is I think having that kind of division, if you will, of just focusing on the goals versus saying that this plan focuses on goals and the vision that's in the act. And if you look at the vision, it allows for strategies on food security, maintaining agriculture, working lands, recreational access. There's a lot of values in there. And so as I understood setting up of the act was that there was very much the opportunity to have strategies in the plan to address the goals and what's in the goals. And there's a suite of different sort of like tracking of different management options for biodiversity. And it's not just exclusively values for biodiversity, right? It's working lands, it's ecological reserves. There's a lot of different embedded values in there. So I would just encourage us to step back and not almost focus on, are there gaps in the goals? Because that was my comment here. I would say, are there gaps in the act and the vision as far as what we're allowed to focus on? I actually see it as being pretty inclusive as far as our ability to have, I was thinking about Carolyn's, question about, is there room to have strategies for agricultural production? Yes, there are. And there will probably be a subset of strategies that try and get towards biodiversity focused strategies, and some of that will fit into, agricultural opportunities and we can have that whole discussion. But I think stepping back, there's a lot of opportunity here. And I don't know if that resonates with folks, but that's my read of the act, not just to focus on the goals.
Thanks, Jamie. Curious how that is resonating with folks.
Yeah, I mean, I think we should appreciate what the act is asking of us and be willing to ask those questions about what are the gaps, where does it work or not work, and grapple as a group and as a state with the places that this act and conservation more generally sort of works for us and doesn't work for us. That should be a constant conversation.
It feels like talked about the need for the start of a process, or there's systemic change that's been happening for decades, or it's been talked about for decades. So perhaps like there's the tools and mechanisms to achieve, as Jamie's term, like the deliberate thing in the near term, the goals that are having it permanently protect, and also can the plan put into motion kind of recommendations around how to advance or how to accelerate or how to at least identify the needs, like the system change around who benefits from, where are the gaps, kind of sort of guiding the overall community on, here's the thing, like this is how these are the tools we can achieve what we have to achieve by 2030 and mechanisms we can do 2050. And here's some recommendations for at least like launching points for improving equity and improving, because we know we're not going to solve it, but like it feels that's like an important, how do we at least name and perhaps tee up some ways we can start to address the system change issue.
Did we hand out the cheat sheet that has the language from the act?
That would be.
Yeah.
curious about the third prompt and anything that feels out of alignment. I see that some people are writing in that section. And don't want to put anybody on the spot, but just curious if there's any feelings in that regard.
Yeah, and wanting to make sure everyone feels grounded in when we're talking about the vision versus the goals of the act, what does that mean? And, the act outlines both the vision and goals. And then there's a directive for the conservation plan should include strategies that address both the vision and goals. And then there's a few other components. And so Trey is handing around kind of an Act 59 cheat sheet that breaks down some of that language. But if that's still unclear, or if anyone's wanting to actually look at the language in the act, we can do. I think that's important context. I think for those of us who are kind of living and breathing this every day, maybe even a step back as a group to what are we talking about?
Yeah.
What does the act direct us to do? Kind of.
Put this in the chat too.
Yes, thank you.
Point of clarification, the full scope that's outlined here, is that a scope that is outlined for the act? Again, I haven't had my head in this in a while, so I apologize.
These are great questions.
That is meant to be, that is our attempt at broadly defining what we think would fall within the scope, but that's a list that we've generated. The act has the vision, the goals, and then it has a few, as Annie was mentioning, specific requirements. In addition to that, one relates to equitable access to land and land-based enterprises. And then the other is sort of about advancing the broad mission as implemented by the Agency of Natural Resources and VCP. And so that is potentially very broad, and that I think it's helpful as we start thinking about actions to start thinking about, okay, what actually is the list of current things that we're doing that is within that legislatively defined scope? Because ultimately that's what we're going to need to do as we build out actions, is sort of take the things that currently exist or the things that we would like to exist that are within scope and put them within those buckets that we've created with the pathways. And so, so that list there is our attempt at sort of defining what exists in Vermont that would be legislative. And so when we're saying gaps, I think we were thinking gaps in that list as we've attempted to define it. And of course, we're more than happy to talk about gaps in the legislation, but our read of that broad vision and just advancing the missions, the existing missions of ANR and DHCP would seem to widen what we talk about.
Yeah, it is a point of probably redundant clarification. There's sort of two documents that we're looking at right now. One is that what Isaac was just describing is a memo that the HCB prepared after reviewing the law and the process to date and talking to our stakeholders and ourselves and ANR. This is how we read the law to define the scope of the plan that's called for. And then the other one that I just handed out and that Annie put in the chat, it says Act 59 fact sheet. That's taken almost verbatim from the statute. So this is a document I created a while ago just to hand out to people with hey, here's what the vision says. And that's kind of we think of it almost on there's a vertical and horizontal access to implementation of this act. So there's this broad vision, but then there's these very specific requirements about meeting the 30 by 30 and 50 by 50 requirements, using VCD as a guide, especially to recommend conservation that fits into the ecological reserve, biodiversity conservation, and natural resource management areas. And that the conservation design itself helps to set up goals for 10% wildlands, or goals for, what we're doing to protect riparian areas, or goals for, so that's we wanted you to have this, but this is all in the act too. These are just kind of pulled onto two sides of a sheet for people to have as a reference. So at that, I think.
Yeah, I mean, it's a lot to try to get your head around. And so we internally have been thinking about what does the next steps look like? How do we go about developing actions? And this felt like the first sort of thing that you need to grapple with as you go into that exercise. And so I think that this exercise is likely to raise more questions as you keep mulling it over. We do have opportunities next week as well to have more conversation, but Feel free to take your time to sort of digest what this says, take a look at the act. We've, as Annie and Trey have been saying, we've been living with this. And so, it does take a minute to sort of like fully digest. Jamie.
And just, I think this is helpful, and for anybody who hasn't looked at the second page of this, it's just really helpful, I think, to look at at the bottom, what's required in the act or the plan. Because if you just read the vision and goals on the first page, it's sort of there as broad, right? But then you can see specifically how there's a lot of ability to tackle a lot of different conservation strategies and looking at the conservation plan requirements. So as I'm thinking about gaps, I'm almost looking at this verse, thinking like, okay, are there gaps here? And then we could look at the memo that you did and feel like, okay, is there something missing there? But it's important to understand this phase 2 sort of requirements.
Yeah. So I'll have to kind of wrap your head around, and I sort of at the risk of having not wrapped my head around all of it, hesitate to speak. But I think one of the things, and again, like maybe I'm missing something, but like in reviewing, I appreciate this scope because I think it's really helpful to kind of start or like kind of continue to reground us in the work and the pathways. I know we've had some previous conversations. I think one of the things that hit me though as I was reviewing this is, that, and I'm speaking from my own, like from perspective that I bring to the table, recognizing that like I really appreciate the rich conversations. But one thing I think I've heard mentioned in the beginning in the vision conversation is this economic piece, and I guess I'm struggling a little bit because I have my own lens on that, but just thinking about like how, like as I read this, it talks about kind of that this work must be grounded in kind of an economic, social, and environmental lens, right? The benefits, right, of land conservation. And I guess I just want to like highlight Caroline in her public comments had talked about like doing some type of kind of larger economic analysis of conservation as it relates to working forests. And again, I recognize that is my particular lens, in terms of this conversation today. I was thinking like Trey, I think it was VCP or Trust for Public Lands, been in this work for a little while, so it's probably 10 plus years ago now. There was a analysis that was done on like an economic analysis done on conservation in Vermont conserved lands. But one of the things that Caroline mentioned that I kind of really piqued my interest was this idea of like, I think one of the tensions that exists in this work from my perspective and from my work of Vermont Woodland Association is this tension between working lands, working forests, our forest economy here in Vermont, ways in the work that the state is doing to try to create viable, and a strong, resilient forest economy, and the work that we're also trying to do in terms of protecting forests, keeping forested land forested. And so I just really piqued my interest, like, and I feel like sometimes I get caught in this like place of like trying to speak to both goals. And I don't know that I feel like I have a lot of like all the data that I need to understand, how does conservation and conservation easements in particular as a tool, how does that influence, a forest economy in a state? Like, as we all know, I was just talking to Tracy about conservation easements, are a tool that can have a lot of different parts and pieces. And obviously development rights is just one part of a conservation easement. But a lot of these conservation easements talk about stewardship and provide, guidance or restrictions, good or bad, right, on future forest management. And so, I guess in my mind, I think if we're really going to lean into, understanding the implications and the long-term impact of some of this work, and if we're really, going to support sort of this economic reality of, we're a state that is 80% forested, and we have an economy that depends on, and we as consumers have a need to produce local, sustainably produced wood products. Can we lean into that? Can we make a recommendation that says like we want to do it like a statewide analysis, really understand like what is that long-term impact and what are the opportunities in terms of like different easement models and different ways to set up conservation that may or may not support or promote or challenge, create more barriers, right? Like it's a spectrum, it's not one or the other, to enforce stewardship and a viable forest economy in the state. So I guess, again, I realize some of that is probably outside of the scope of this, but I think, Caroline, to your point earlier about like, maybe the starting step is leaning into some of this tension as I see it, and doing some analysis and like hiring some of that out and getting some data so that we really understand what's going on, how this may impact that.
So how does conserving more land and how you conserve that land impact the forest economy?
Yeah, I mean,
Getting into the weeds.
right, and I think there's probably other lenses, and I like it's a starting place, I think, but I think in my mind, like that's like from my perspective, I think that's one of our the points of tension that I've heard from folks around the state, and I think this is an opportunity. Like we have a lot of different things on the table, but I would love to. Like I think that's not necessarily spelled out in this as it states in terms of the scope of work, and I think maybe it is. I didn't see it, and so I would love to explore that further.
I appreciate you raising that. We have been hearing similar types of questions from the agricultural community.
Yeah, right.
What's the impact of easements? Are they the end all? Are there limitations? Are there things that we've got to do beyond easements? Or, just like what, is there the easement structure? What are the terms of the easement?
Right. Different models.
And how is that impacting the agriculture? So there's feels like a close parallel.
I think so.
Very different economies, but I appreciate that. That's really helpful.
What else do people have questions or comments? I want to point out that this is the work that we're starting right now, both in this section and as we pivot into the next exercise, we're going to keep doing together over the course of the next month. So we have decided to move the next set of regional listening session meetings to January so that the TAC can meet again in December to continue this conversation about actions and how to draft them and how broadly the scope is. And we want to continue that. And we're going to have 2 online working lunch opportunities next week to continue this conversation for people who are here and for people who had other obligations today. And this is going to be the topic, is kind of really leaning into these kind of the scope and the actions. Kate, I would say, one thing as people think about draft actions, Gus said this earlier, is that this plan that we recommend to the legislature it's not going to just by fiat sort of accomplish conservation. It's going to start a bunch more processes. It's like we're launching 1,000 ships with this plan. And so some of them, actions can be ongoing things like, I think we need a capacity scoping analysis. I think we need a review of easement tools. So there can be active actions that are reports back that happen first. And then, yeah.
Yeah, that's great.
Nick.
I think when I'm looking at the deliverables on the plan itself, it feels like tools here very much get at 1 and 2 in terms of mechanism methods, implementation methods, and what sort of set a comprehensive strategy. I would just, in terms of when we get to 3 and 4, in terms of recommendations for how we define the provided increased equitable access, and then this broader recommendations for enhancing the current investments and commitments, those don't get lost. I don't think they will, but I just think that there's this sort of how do we get to the goals, and then it feels like the plan does include deliberately these sort of how do we proceed here with the type of sort of longer term recommendations that could address some of the systemic inequities. I think that a recognition that that it would be, and I don't think it would happen, but it would be a shame if it was sort of a bulleted list of oh, and here's how we're going to do this equitably, boom, 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 but versus here's how we're going to start, or suggest engage a process that actually address head on these things.
So welcome reflection of what I just said. Yeah, thank you. Are there any other TAC comments? Quickly, I see your hand, Zach, but Gannon.
Yeah, thank you. To maybe echo Jamie and Nick and some others here, I appreciate the broad vision that you're putting forward here. I think that's really important, and obviously it's reflected in the Act and is important in our conservation work broadly. I do also think the Act helps to direct us and helps to focus our thinking. That vision is so broad and so important, but so broad as to be challenging to work within. I've heard multiple times now, we keep saying it's hard to wrap your head around, and it is. It's also hard to comprehend how an act, Gus, you said it earlier, we have 8 months here to craft this act, how that can really capture that broad of a vision and meaningfully put forward implementable, actionable recommendations at a vision that broad. So I would just caution us to also look to where the act provides some more specific guidance. And I think it does that through the goals and some of the other language to focus on implementing Vermont conservation design. And the 30 by 30 and 50 by 50 goals, although lofty and challenging, and it does also provide some framing for what the act is trying to push for, the permanent legal land protection and other durable mechanisms and measures. So I think just keeping that in mind as well, that in order for this to be a really meaningful and actionable plan, it needs to be focused and targeted as well. And thinking about that, in that broad vision, there are so many other plans and so many other organizations and entities doing great work in the space that I think can help us achieve that vision, but doesn't necessarily need to be the focus of this plan. And so where can we look to those other plans and those other organizations to take the lead, and where can we reference those, but not necessarily maybe include as specific actions in this plan? And I think, again, the unique aspect of this act is its focus on the 30 by 30 and 50 by 50 goals, and also on the way to get there through implementing Vermont conservation design. So just, again, appreciating that broad vision, but also maybe using some of the language and focus of the act to refine that vision to what can we distill out of that to make this as actionable and as effective as possible.
I would just
Can you say who you are?
I'm Krista. I'm representing conservation commissions at the municipal level. As we get into the weeds with tools in our toolbox, I feel like I need a glossary of like, what are all of the tools that we have available to us now? What are all of the tools that, kind of crowdsourcing, like what are all the tools we could use that we aren't using right now? What's the vision, like I sort of want like a huge brain dump of all of our tools that we could put in the toolbox, because I think what I'm hearing, and I agree with, is that people are craving creativity, innovative solutions, not necessarily the exact same tools we've used in the past. And I just don't know what those are. And I would, even some of the things on this list, like I don't know what they all mean. So I think having kind of, to me, that would be really helpful. I don't know if that's right now necessarily, but at some point.
That seems very useful. So I think that's something we can do. That seems like a list we can generate.
I also would just remind I think it was question 3 in the inventory report asked for the totality of conservation practices. So maybe that's something we can resurface.
Print that out and surface.
That was to achieve the goals. That's the way that ends. So it might not have been fully inclusive.
Might be a good starting point though, and then we can add some, what are the other. Again, I was thinking that.
So Emily, Center for Communities, this is not really quite answering this question, but you've inspired me to say something. It just came up. So I was at a planning commission meeting last night, and we're working on the new town plan for Heinsberg, and we're looking at the new Act 250 tier 3 designations. Like, what does this mean for us in our town plan? Like, this is happening anyway. I'm sitting around the room with some people who have environmental backgrounds and some people who are like realtors and all kinds of people. And I'm just really thinking about like, how is this plan actionable by local communities and like the volunteers who are showing up around the table and trying to do on the ground community planning? And that feels like a really important puzzle. And I was dreaming of also a map So not just like, what are all the practices and programs, but I want to know like, where do the tier 3 designations interact with the conservation plan, which interact with like the wetlands permits? Like I want a map to know what's protected by what and where are the gaps. So I like think there's some real work to be done moving this plan from what conservation organizations, professionals in the field are going to do with it to what like volunteers who are showing up exhausted at the end of the day or trying to make plans for their communities are doing with those tools and the information and the skills that those volunteers have to both participate in the statewide vision and also to guide the vision of their communities and the people who are living with the impacts on a daily basis.
Yeah, I mean, I think that to the extent we can create tools that help people understand prioritization or how to value why you would conserve or and assist, whether it's the communities, towns, could be individuals that the values a land provides that they may come to the table with some in terms of what they're thinking, but to support and there's acute ecological sensitivity here. So if you were to conserve, you want to do X, Y, or Z. So just the more they create just accessibility, that information and guidance where people can just make that usable, I feel like would be extremely valuable, knowing how many different priorities we're talking about or values that the conservation.
Yes, and can it be a two-way street? Like, are we providing education and are we also providing opportunities to participate in the decision making? How do we build those systems?
Sort of building off that, but slightly like maybe heading down a little bit of a different path. I was thinking to myself, like, where do landowners fit in, the scope of work as it's currently outlined? I don't see the word landowner show up anywhere under any of these items. And I think, again, just thinking that like we are in a state that's 80% forested, but 2/3 of that is privately owned. Landowners, and I've heard it mentioned several times, willing landowners, which I think is an important distinction, are going to be such an important partner in any success that this initiative has. And so, just kind of to your point, like, yes, I agree. I think education across that spectrum is really important, but I was thinking like outreach and education, and engagement and providing kind of that, like, I see technical assistance show up for forestry enterprises, which is great. But again, like I don't know, maybe we haven't gotten there yet, right? Because I think we're sort of starting to kind of go down this slope of like target audiences and thinking about communication and all of that. Oh, sorry. Yeah. And Kate Moore with Vermont Woodland Association, for those online. Again, just thinking about kind of where landowners show up in here, I think we need to be really conscious and targeted in terms of how we're, and any other targeted audiences like municipalities or, I think it would be interesting to look at this scope again with that lens. Because again, I don't know that I see them showing up, and maybe I'm missing something. So.
Good. Fair enough. Yeah. First, I'm just going to apologize. We've got a 20-year employee who's having his final day today. I've got to get up, go join a lunch for him in a minute. This has been a great conversation. I think before you got here, in terms of my general interests on behalf of the Housing and Conservation Board, we have, after going to a meeting covered, set up a program just to work with landowners who wish to donate easements. So this process is already beginning to change how we're thinking. If landowners are not showing up in the language you're seeing, then that's absolutely a big miss. And I think your comment and Emily's about engaging communities is, whether we're engaging communities or families or individuals, we've got to be doing all of that in order for the goals to be achieved. That's where the rubber meets the road. It isn't somebody in Montpelier making a decision. It's always what happens across a kitchen table around a family discussion, as well as the policies that will support them. So this is really rich discussion, really important. I think of a community like Heinsberg, where you have all this growth pressure on you, as well as a desire for conservation, a great trail system, a pretty sizable town forest. And those are fascinating conversations that this plan needs to be able to support in a meaningful way. So taking all of that to heart, and with that, I've got to jump up and be someplace else, but I hope to
see you all again in December. So,
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
One quick placeholder comment, just mentioned tier 3, I think just the idea that the connection to other plans, I know that that's also been envisioned, but just thinking, like, you know, where thousands of online owners are probably going to have not development restrictions, but development considerations on their parcel. Many of those are the areas that could be a conservation interests are identified because they are sensitive technologically or forestry, wildlife borders, that type of thing. So there could be an opportunity just to sync that with what's going on there to say, yeah, there's a meaningful reason why these areas exist on your parcel. You want to you need to go through an Act 50 permitting process, but perhaps that's an opportunity to help engage these folks. That perhaps there's some alternative. Perhaps those are areas you could want to bring you into the process. And if you're interested in considering, here's how that either provide economic value for them or conservation value. Just the idea of linking these things are not happening in isolation, and they're likely going to, so they don't butt heads when they do happen. I think this is awful.
Thanks, Nick.
We're doing on time.
I think I wanted to see if there's any more
Yeah.
quick questions. Zach, do you have a clarifying question? Yeah. I'll repeat your question.
Meetings that might be happening between today's TAC meeting and another TAC meeting in December. And I was wondering if those would also be open to the public.
Yes. Yeah, we're going to warn, after today, we're going to warn 3 meetings over the course of the next 4 weeks. And we'll put that on the portal and try to do a better job with the listserv too, to make it a little broader awareness of when these are happening. But 2-hour-long lunch sessions next week to continue the exercise we're about to pivot into, and then a full TAC meeting in December. And then we're going to, in January and February, we're going to be hoping to really, we have 5 locations around the state where we're going to gather like we did in July and August. And that's what we've referred to with the summer meetings. We didn't have anything besides those. But we had those 5 meetings, 4 in person and 1 online. We're going to redo that. We're going to do that again in January. But we're also going to provide some support to TAC members or other organizations to host their own meetings if they want, to provide us feedback on this. And we'll do that in a structured way. And we think, although it's not final yet, that we could even put together some mini grants to support that out of the budget that we have from National Fish and Wildlife Federation. So way more input into the development of actions as over the next like 3 or 4 months. So this is like the first conversation today. And we're gonna break in about 40 minutes for public comment, and then grab some food and do some wrap up and reminders and all that. But I'm gonna I wanted to do some context framing. I get the job today of all the, like, at the risk of being redundant, I want to go say a few things that we've said and kind of reiterate them and make sure we're all on the same page. And while I do this, a couple more resources that Annie and Isaac can hand around, one of which is the framework report is up on the portal. We excerpted from that the section of it that has the objectives and pathways in it, just as a reminder for people who are in the room today or for people who are online. And we also have I think a cheat sheet in there that's sort of like, we're going to keep referring back. We're going to start this exercise today. We're not trying to finish. Like, everybody needs to be really comfortable with like ongoing conversations, because we're not intending to finish any of these discussions in the next 40 minutes. But we do have in addition to that cheat sheet and the objectives and pathways, if anybody wants a copy of the act to take with them or to look at, we've got a few of those printed out as well. So anyways, so here, let me take it from the top in terms of a couple of framing reminders. One is that the way that VHCB understands Act 59 to be written is that it requires us to provide a set of recommendations back to the legislature. First, it asked us to provide a set of analytic recommendations. We published those last June, then we republished them after public comment and feedback in the summer. That's available. That's what we refer to as the inventory. The next set of recommendations we're developing is this phase 2 conservation plan. But VHCB has no appropriative power. We have no authorizing power. We don't, this has not become law when we issue recommendations. We're issuing recommendations to the General Assembly to authorize, to fund, to carry forward. some of the things that we're going to recommend we can already do, or we are already doing, but some of them may require statutory changes, new appropriations, regulatory changes, et cetera. So that's there. This is very much of an ongoing process beyond just this stakeholder work that we're doing here together. We published the framework report last month or a month and a half ago as a moment in time report of our initial thinking on the scope of the plan. So the objectives and the pathways that are going to be the kind of the meat and potato that define the scope of actions that we're going to recommend. That's what that report is. It's not final. The recommendations are not final. That's why we're asking for public comment. Nor did we build all the actions into it yet. That's the ongoing process. But we do see those objectives and pathways as kind of the backbone. And we put a lot of time into that before we shared it with the TAC, and we've been listening and hearing and culling it. And the way we developed that was with reference to the inventory. So the inventory contains 500 pages of people's recommendations, hopes, and dreams. And so we went through that multiple different times and ways. And so in framing those objectives and pathways, it was with reference to what we've already heard from people who've participated. But that doesn't mean it's final. But the next layer of this is actions and action development. So, what we want is basically, if you think of the plan itself is going to have sort of like 4 layers to it. So the objectives, there are 3 broad objectives. One is about conservation in communities, and that includes, support for working lands, for equitable access, for recreation, for resilience, for place-based education. So there's a set of pathways and actions that we define under the broad objective of conservation in communities. There's a set of pathways and actions that we define under the objective of ecological health and the use of the framework that VCD provides. And that's what sort of that second objective is developing actions under those pathways. And then the third objective and the pathways underneath it get at both how do we build the ongoing capacity in state government, municipal government, volunteer organizations to do this, as well as how do we innovate to beat some of those capacity and cost curves that we're dealing with right now? Like, what are are there alternatives? Somebody asked about alternative easements, or understanding what easements can do and can't do, and can we have new kinds? Are there kinds that town planning commissions could implement and do with landowners that are smaller than what big land trusts take on? So that's what that third objective and the pathways and actions under it is going to bring. We just pause right there and see, does that should all be refresher, but everybody's tracking. And what we did is we got, we had a couple of sessions with the TAC where you provided initial feedback on that. We had the regional listening sessions where people provided some initial quick snippets of feedback. I know some people have felt frustrated if they've heard us say that we think that these are somehow now consensus decisions. When Future IQ just describes sort of like the broad consensus of ideas, I think what they were trying to describe is that the quick reactions we got from people did sort of broadly support the direction we were going, but there was lots of questions and critical ideas as well. And those are all captured through those processes. And we're going to continue to do that as we go forward. For today, though, what I wanted to start having us think about is like, all right, how do we start to build out actions underneath this? So if there's an objective layered underneath that, there are several pathways. Under each pathway, there can be actions and even sub-actions under each action that detail this out like an old-fashioned Roman numeral outline that goes further and further to the right on the page. That will help us and we want that matrix to cover the breadth of how we read the law. So recommendations that implement VCD, recommendations that support farmland access and alternative tenure models. We want recommendations that support recreation community. We want recommendations that help conservation commission. So like the set of recommendations in the plan is going to be very broad. We also, so I've said we want to work on this for the next few months together, but then the last piece, like the third phase of our work as a TAC, is going to be then to take that broad vision of objectives, pathways, actions, and sub-actions, and then say, what's the implementation timetable and implementation plan for these over the next 5 years and the next 25 years? And that's going to be we want to continue to build our work together and our ability to agree and disagree and move forward, because if it's hard to figure out what all the actions should be, then sifting through all that and say, which ones of those are fundable, which ones of those have the most impact, which ones of these actions have to go first before other things that they're predicate to. So that's going to be a whole nother level of engagement. And it'll be a whole nother set of TAC and stakeholder engagement and regional listening sessions before we hand in recommendations in June. So that's kind of where we're going as we go forward. We have, so just so to be fully transparent, we have been working, like we've been trying to build out a set of actions for you to react to as well as what you come up with. We had thought we might have those available today, but it's, for two reasons. One, we didn't have enough time to sharpen them and make them as kind of to write you a shorter letter, if you will. And so we were working with A&R on those, but we also thought it'd be really useful today and over the 2 meetings next week to really generate some input and ideas from the TAC that we can then fold into that and sort of say like, hey, here's how we were articulating some actions. Here's a set of comments and questions from TAC members that look like they're aligned or questioning these concepts. So when we get to the TAC meeting in December, we'll bring you back a synthesized document that reflects our thinking and preparation with A&R, but also reflects what you give us over the next couple of weeks. We'll also be able to get stakeholder comments on that as well. But then, of course, the TAC meeting will lead to regional stakeholder meetings and other things where we can, keep vetting this. So we're trying to get things into as tight a shape as possible by January to take out to the public. And whether that's in the regional listening sessions that the RPCs help us host or ones that you might help us by hosting yourselves. That's the kind of document production that we're aiming towards is objective, pathway, actions, sub-actions, get feedback on that, then go back again while we're vetting all that and pulling all our feedback together and start thinking about how implementation priorities rise out of that. So, thank you. Questions about anything I just said from anybody? First TAC, but if there's any technical questions from friends who are online.
Sorry, I will just share that we're returning to this. Here's the proposed structure of the plan conversation because we have been getting a lot of questions from TAC members and community members alike about like, what is this framework report actually, and what does it include, and where is it leading, and what's the structure of the plan, and what does that mean? So that is a lot of why we are having this conversation today, to have an opportunity to make sure that we're all clear, and then we can continue that conversation with the public. So just wanted to ground us in that, and yeah, we really want to hear questions, feedback, or like, I think this structure stinks. Like even that.
Is it publicly posted kind of timeline or what, basically what Trey just says, like,
we're gonna repost all that.
okay, because I think it'd be helpful for people to just check in and say like, okay, I can see where we are in the process. I know what to expect what's coming next. So we've had a lot of changes to the process. And so it's helpful as a TAC member and as the public, I think, to know what to expect.
Absolutely. Yeah, I hear that completely. And yeah, that is definitely a priority.
Great.
Yeah, and I mean, I think we've said it already, but I know that it's been a little flip-floppy in terms of that. We've had a number of different interruptions as we've proceeded over the last 7 or 8 months, and each time it's taken us a while to kind of get our feet back under us. So we're hoping that we've made a final pivot in the way that we're conducting our business, and that this is we have 8 months together, and that's a lot of time to do good work and also go out and hear from people. It'll also go very quickly, but I think we have ample time to land this ship and hopefully move towards some people's optimistic visions and address the reasons why if we don't feel optimistic, let's take those on. So, Nick.
Yeah.
Process related, but one of the benefits of the framework now is it's broad and has a lot of pathways. It's pretty interesting to cover a lot of ground. The actions that'll cascade underneath those will kind of further umbrella out. Curious kind of the thinking around the prioritization process, because I guess my only it's not even a fear, but thinking like we're going to have a very long laundry list of actions, and part of that you spoke to in terms of thinking about timeline and implementation, but we keep having the limited resource conversation too, just thinking what the the process for either within those activities, thinking about prioritization, or amongst them. Like we can't do it all. It feels like will be a real reality. So just question if there's in that process thinking about how do we do that prioritization or kind of layer that into the.
Well, one thing we feel really strongly about is that we want the legislature to see a kind of a full set of recommendations that says all the things that would be needed to do all the things we think need to happen. But we also want to help them by saying we're going to do some work together as stakeholders to tell you what we think are the most prioritized and necessary things you have to do before you do other things, and things that just rise to the top right away to try and meet the 2030 goals. Whether we meet them by 2030 or by 2032, I think remains to be seen. But to move us towards that level of permanent conservation that the Act calls for, with really high quality work, right? That's the goal, with engagement with communities, engagement with non-traditional partners, engagement with the people who've been doing the work all along at the big statewide land trusts and A&R. So keeping all those people moving towards that, while at the same time thinking like there's a longer term vision here too. That's the 2050 goal, which includes more types of conservation. And so we're not going to wait till 2030 or 31 and say, okay, let's start the race to 2050. We're going to create a second timetable. So it's like the pathway to 2030 and the pathway to 2050 will both be in our recommendations, at least as we at VHCB, in consultation with A&R and with the help of all of you, can come up with a kind of a prioritization matrix.
Perhaps it could be a great opportunity to think too about like the main angles are sort of community resilience, and that's a lot of that's one where public comment and input would be the most valuable. And then knowing the second bucket around conservation design, that's not that the public can't weigh in on that, but that's where there's more expertise weighted into the knowledge and understanding of VCD. So some way to to what extent these actions fulfill community resilience, very simple sense, like community resilience, biodiversity protection, but being able to kind of score them to some degree across those buckets and think, where does it make a lot of sense to engage that public comment? Where does it make sense for experts with more familiar with VCD to be engaged? Just so how we can get to some, you mentioned giving legislature a little bit of a sense of here's how valuable they could be, but breaking that down to different pieces of the plan. So just knowing we have that.
Thanks, Nick. And that was Nick Vemba from Vimba, who was just speaking. If you're following online, you can be Nick Vimba if you want. All right. And again,
I was just responding to Nick's question on prioritization, and Trey, I think you kind of summarized exactly what I was thinking of. The Act itself provides some of that guidance on prioritization, and looking at the 30 by 30 goals and the 50 by 50 goals. And from my read of the Act, there is that prioritization of what is called for under the 30 by 30 goals, and then the broader tent of the 50 by 50 goals. So I think, Trey, thank you for identifying that. And then also, I think in the Act itself, there is also that prioritization of those two components, Nick, the community resilience and the biodiversity protection, and through the implementation of Vermont conservation design. So again, I think the language of the Act helps to distill our focus down, and so I just think that's worth highlighting here.
Others. Oliver or Greg online, anything you want to ignore our friends online?
Greg Charity's also been having some connectivity issues, so maybe with us, but.
Okay, wait, let's take a deep breath and just see if I'm just gonna give everybody, because like Annie, I was urged to wait until I was uncomfortable before I talked. As a former 8th grade teacher, that's really hard.
We do have Oliver here.
Oh, go ahead, Oliver.
Hi, thanks. Yeah, I just saw there's a question in the chat about why Maine Woods Company has been prioritized over any local representative for working lands. And so Chris Castano was here earlier. He introduced him. I'm not sure if he's still with us, but he introduced himself as working for Maine Woods Company, which is true. Chris is a Vermont resident. He's been working in the forest products industry for decades in Vermont and New England, New Hampshire, Maine. He's very involved with different organizations and committees in Vermont. He's part of the Forest Future Strategic Roadmap Implementation Steering Committee and is very knowledgeable about wood markets and working lands throughout northern New England, including Vermont. And so when we looked for a representative from the forest products industry to join the Technical Advisory Committee for Act 59, we reached out to 7 or 8 people who were part of the Vermont forest products industry, some of the usual suspects and names that people are familiar with. And a lot of people, well, actually everyone other than Chris that we asked said, I'd really like to be involved, but I don't have the time or I can't make the commitment. Whereas Chris stepped up, he volunteered, and he's been an active member of the Technical Advisory Committee, and I work with him and some of the other working lands folks like Greg from the Forest Service to incorporate those perspectives into our contributions to the Act 59 process. So that's why Chris Castano was asked to be the working lands representative to the Technical Advisory Committee. Happy to discuss that further if anyone's interested.
Thank you, Oliver. And just so the group knows, in the Zoom chat over the past few minutes, there have been some questions coming through about TAC members and why are certain members appointed to the TAC and how did that happen? So I was going to mention those during our next round of public comment, just to let the group know that those questions are coming through. And I think we can figure out how we might want to address those. Oh, thank you, Oliver, for that clarification.
And generally what we did was we looked at on that cheat sheet, there's a list of statutory stakeholders that are provided in the act. And so we tried to find representatives who had been engaged at the inventory phase, who helped us across the board to represent those different interests, not as appointees. The TAC members have not been appointed or directed to be here. We asked them if they would join us to provide input and feedback as we go forward. And that's how we use that to invite people. And that's who's here, but we are also, there'll be a lot of public engagement still coming up that's not just TAC members or through TAC members to bigger constituencies that they represent. So, all right, if there's no more comments or questions about the kind of broad, I put a couple of questions out on a sheet that you can look at. One says, does the proposed structure that's in, TAC members have already thought about this a little bit, but do the objectives and pathways and what I just described, having actions nested underneath it and then an implementation timetable, does that make sense? Are there any questions about or suggestions for developing those? I was going to invite people to reflect on those if they want to, but I'm going to smoosh a second question into this and give you a little bit of time to think and write, and then we'll come back for 20 minutes or so and just do some quick report outs. But if you want to flip your sheet over and just sort of begin thinking, and we're going to do this in the 2-hour-long meetings next week, and we're going to be doing it at the next TAC meeting. But if you're feeling a burning desire right now to be like, all right, I'm really interested in objective 1 and in some of the pathways under that, and I just want to take my time to brainstorm, these are some necessary studies or actions or sets of resources that we need to have. That's a perfectly good thing to do for the next 10 minutes. We're also going to do that in a very structured way next week, is say, all right, TAC members, at the meeting, or if you weren't able to be at the meeting, you identified your visions for what this could be, what you'd like to see happen, what's really important to you in your communities. How does that get represented as actions in a plan? Right? So that's where we're headed with this conversation. This background on scope, this background on how we're setting up the scope with the objectives and pathways was really to move us towards that question as a group of stakeholders. What needs to happen? And you can be as detailed as possible. So I'm going to suggest that we take 9 minutes to just do some pencil work, and then we'll do 10 minutes, just share outs, questions, comments. But I'm going to bring this prompt back to the work sessions next week. What are the actions that manifest your vision, your community's needs, ideas, hopes, and aspirations within these objectives and pathways. Or if there are pathways and objectives, especially at the pathway level, something's missing and you want actions, but you don't see where to nest them, that's going to be something we want to know. But now I'm done talking for a minute. Let people get to that. Couple more minutes here. People okay if I call you back together in 30 seconds? All right, gang. Um, let's let's have about 10 minutes after I hand the floor to Annie here in a second. I want to hear like hot takes, knowing that this is just the first chance today to talk about these questions. And I've put some questions on the white page up at the front of the room that I'm going to ask Gunnar to put into the chat if you don't mind, Gunnar. These are kind of like the framing homework questions to think about before next week if you're going to come, or to send us written feedback, or both. So, on the front side of the page we handed out, it says, does the proposed structure of this, objectives, pathways, and actions make sense? Happy to hear about that now. Are there any questions for the process of developing those actions? And then if you wrote on the back, or if you've been thinking about specific actions, how does your vision for the conservation plan fit in with this proposed framework? Are there aspects of your vision that you don't see fitting, that the plan doesn't create space for, the objectives and pathways framework doesn't create space for? What do you feel like should be added or adjusted within this framework? And what are you most interested to make sure that the plan includes? So we're going to come back to those next week. But for now, today, I want to see if people have quick questions, comments, thoughts, proposals, et cetera. And we'll follow up with this stuff in email too. So you don't have to remember what I just said or take pictures, but you're more than welcome to. Anyway, the floor is open to y'all. I want to recognize Hannah Sessions, who is a TAC member who's on the screen and joined us a little late today. Hannah's from Blue Ledge Farm and was a TAC stakeholder we invited to broadly speak on behalf of agricultural producers, as that's what she does very ably. You probably had her cheese, which is awesome. Anyway, welcome, Hannah. Nice to see you. I sent you an email with a bunch of handouts on it. Yeah. All right, who's open the floor? And
I have a hot take.
all right, hot take.
So, I mean, this is, so again, Emily, I currently work for Center for Coastal Communities. The last 16 years I worked with South Hero Land Trust, and like conservation in communities was my thing for 16 years. I think conservation communities should empower communities. I don't think that this pathway is empowering communities.
Hot takes.
That's my hot take.
All right.
I don't think
Good.
there's any empowerment in this pathway.
In objective one?
Objective.
Okay. Happy to come back to that.
Yes.
The goal is to be empowering. We want conservation to make life work well for people. So what else? Other hot takes, questions, comments?
Think, so I'm here, I'm Krista, I'm representing municipal conservation commissions, and my day job is in marketing. And I just want to say, I think it's really important that this document be really readable, really skimmable, and I think we're on our way toward that. And I think that's really excellent. And I think just wanted to highlight that the way it is structured, all of the context that's in it. I know there's, a lot of things to work through, but I just appreciate the effort that's gone into that part, because I think like it has to be accessible to people, and by accessible I mean like they have to be able to read it and understand what it means, and see themselves in it. And I think this is getting us there.
Thanks, Krista. Other hot takes or questions? Yeah, Nick and then Kate, or Kate and then Nick.
I just wanted to follow up on that. I think we need to be clear on the target audience, and I do think there may be an opportunity for there to be different versions for different audiences. So building on that.
Related, I think, to the idea of audiences and sort of when we start to think about actions, sort of who's going to take that action, and being thoughtful about. I wrote down this sort of starting to think about resources too at the beginning. As we think about actions, it gets to some degree the prioritization conversation, but what will it take? But also who's going to take it? And so I think if we can think about how the plan helps empower whoever is going to be taking the action to do that thing, it's just like what will it take to enable the community to pursue this, particular pathway under objective one, or similarly to pursue the things laid out in objective two. So just, I think the actions don't exist in isolation; they have to be performed by some person.
That was Nick Vimba. No, Nick Bennett and Kate Forer right before him.
We can share it.
Okay.
Anybody else with a question or a comment? If not, I'm happy to wrap this a little early, but we have about 5 more minutes that we had set aside for just questions and comments. Again, this is like homework to take into your dream life and come back to. Either if you're able to join us next week, or there are a couple lunch hours we'll send out invites for, or you can get back to us in writing on these prompts. So, that's if you can't make those, and if you're coming, you can still send us stuff in writing. So, beginning to think
and
that through.
As at our December meeting, I was just going to say when we meet in December, we'll also be starting to review some content. What might actions look like? And I think these questions stand for that exercise too. So I think these types of questions, as we work through this development of actions, will be kind of like similar themes we keep returning to. So.
Well done. Well said. All right, and Jamie, and we'll see if there's anybody else.
Yeah, just a couple of thoughts. As one thing is I think the utility of this is trying to make it user friendly, right? And so like some of the language in Act 59 can be a bit wonky that we are looking at before. But I do wonder if it would help to kind of go back to what we were looking at before, what's required in the plan. And I'm not sure it shows up in a straightforward enough way so the public sort of understands that there's sort of these goals, the vision, they're packaged together in a conservation plan, equity's part of it, and ongoing investments. So I think, working through these 3 objectives is a way to try and like make it friendly organization, but just I'm still chewing on this front page and wondering if it's landing with sort of all the pieces enough. And then one other thought is that, at the end of, I guess it would be the last objective 3 is sort of a catch-all. What are the new programs and tools that we need? And as I'm thinking about so much of this framework, there's going to be potentially programs or tools that touch on a number of the, like, not just an isolated thing in one section. It's going to be like multiple goals throughout this. And so anyway, I don't know, I'm just struggling a little bit with it being siloed towards the end, even though it's so much like a big part of this.
We struggled.
Yeah.
We started to think about actions, about all the cross-referencing.
Yeah.
It's so integrated. So not surprised that you're struggling, to be honest with you. Yeah.
So I'm just going to say, repeat what Jamie was saying. The last point he was making is that because naturally actions might fall under multiple pathways, it's kind of where they go and how you embed them as a question that he was raising. And Isaac was just validating that as we've worked with the team at A&R and thought about this, we've already been thinking really much like, how do we provide some direct cross-references internally within the document so that if there's innovations that we describe under objective 3 that really uplift actions under objective 1 or 2, make that explicit that these are cross-referential. The other kind of referential work that we want this plan to do, or that VHCB is thinking it would be important for this to do, is to reference other existing plans and initiatives. So the food security roadmap, the forest future roadmap, the SCORP, the land access opportunity board sort of access project, the way that we are engaging the wildlife and forest action plans, VCD. So there are a number of frameworks out there that are in motion, and we want to uplift that work with conservation and conservation related investments. So there may be whole actions and sets of actions that are like, see forest future roadmap, items 1, 2, 3, and 7, see SCORP, so that's, as you think about this between now and the next couple of sessions, it's like, one, how do these objectives and pathways and actions talk to each other within the plan? And then how do they incorporate by reference the resilience implementation strategy, or the SCORP, which I named already. All right. Nick, go ahead.
I wonder if there's just in the framework, it's been helpful to see these 3 pieces laid out. I wonder if there's an opportunity to kind of talk about the sort of community resilience piece, the biodiversity piece, 1 and 2. In some ways, it's almost like those set up what we want to accomplish in terms of the value along those axes. And then 3 is so vital to doing any of it. It's like, that's how we will support any of that stuff will require additional capacity. So there could be, sometimes it does feel like objective 3 kind of gets put in back and it's like, oh, and we just need more capacity to do all of it. But just that could just be from a messaging standpoint, but 1 and 2 really help orient, like, what are the ways we want to target community resilience, target biodiversity protection, and 3 is like, how are we going to then get the capacity involved? That's sort of a reflection as we think about, and as I've looked through this now many times. But
yeah, as we've been mulling, like we've seen, like, like there's a potential pathway under objective 3 that says support stewardship and restoration, and that's going to be like, what are the kind of programmatic investments and things like that, and then that will cross-reference to objective 2 and objective 1, all the places where stewardship and restoration show up. But one of the things I've heard today that I think is, as we prepare content for December to really inform that conversation, we've been thinking, like, if you have a objective pathway, okay, action. So what is the action? Who are the stakeholders? Who's the lead implementer of that action? Who are the stakeholders? What's the timetable for the action? And does this action lead to more permanent conservation, or does it lead to support for more permanent conservation? Is any statutory change needed, or a regulatory implementation, or an appropriation? So we're gonna have to figure out how to do a spreadsheet that helps us say, are these actionable, measurable? Are they effective to meet the goals and vision? So that's how we've been approaching Right, Jamie, if you want to grab some food, there's.
Can you hear me? Thumbs up? Yeah? Okay. We
Oh.
did it.
Yay. Online, so sorry, the internet dropped here and we had to reconnect as hosts, and it was more complicated than we could almost figure out. We're taking like 2 minutes for people here to grab a quick break and grab a bite, and then we're gonna do public comment, and then we'll wrap. So
Thank you all for your patience.
yeah, thanks very much.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for getting us back.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Grab food as you come back in. Yeah, that's free for all. Yeah. There's a skinny pancake. Right. They're not slices of pizza. It's actually cups. And there's
I think we're gonna have to just out of the boxes, but they said that should. Yeah. Got a good treat box.
Yeah, I think that.
Yeah.
They're small things.
Yeah, and there's salad, or take a whole salad. There's plenty of food for. So, but I will see if there's bigger.
Question.
I would just assume all the Vermont things. Apples, bacon, syrup.
Cheese.
Yeah. Busy. Yeah. Yeah, how about you? We do have soda. It's all
It has been a while now. Crazy thing. We're also busy.
Exactly. I feel like
no, not yet.
I'm sorry. I was thinking.
Oh, that's okay. It was actually on this country. Yes.
Oh, you did?
Yes, we got that down. Yes. Today.
We're still, we talked about it, so we have.
These are some big.
Yeah.
And there is.
Exactly.
Two initiatives are still doing our plan and kind of pause when we presented but never broken out. Pause when we are still very much helping that out and developing and although we're going to have dried up.
Yeah. So,
They found something.
well, that's great. Yeah. But that's a hard thing, it's like, yeah, I mean, I hope they don't get
They have like.
We'll have the money. We're still building out what it looks like.
God, what about so they get self
Pilot projects with.
There was 4 bags.
If and when, it really does. I'm like, oh, this would be great. Let's do this. And then it takes
By the way, I was saying.
many months to
Let's see, you were so
I wouldn't say anything.
Are you driving right from here to?
I have one of our. You're gonna go for there.
I was just telling Trey.
I had it on my calendar and I was like,
Just in a
driveway.
appreciate that.
Actually, I can't.
You don't want to
Get dropped off.
go and just like come over. No, I could. It's like, I've been burning the midnight oil. Like, Joe, I'll let you handle this.
There's a lot of other stuff right now, so like.
Oh, this is
no,
Outdoor Business Alliance.
Yeah.
Outdoor Economy Summit. No.
Yeah.
I don't think they got a good whack of snow.
They take a look correctly now.
They don't have a nearly snow.
So it's opening next Saturday.
But yeah, well,
You're welcome. North Arrow or South Arrow? Grand Isle. You are.
I might actually.
Your response is good.
It's
actually when I was
Everyone was like, EBCC, they were like sluggish, like they just sat down at a big lunch.
Yeah. You gotta have a sharp activity. Yeah. Like your turns.
Exactly. There you go.
And let's get started again in about 2 minutes, just so we can finish up on time. We'll do a eating meeting for the last bit here. So folks online, we're just gathering people back to sit down, and then we're gonna open it up for final public comment. And then I'm gonna do some reminders and let people, the outro here is gonna be really mellow like Jalelo. So, and cool like lemonade, if you're anticipating the rest of that lyric. There are some seltzers if anybody needs a seltz. I feel a little parched myself. All right. Couple of people taking their seats. Can we do, for online folks who'd like to share a comment before we finish, put a hand up, and Zach, you're the only member of the public here in the room. Do you have a comment that you want to share here at the end as well? Okay. Carolyn has a hand up, and Zach has a hand up, and Rick Enzer has a hand up. So if we could go, we haven't heard from Rick yet. I'm going to ask Rick and then Carolyn and then Zach to take 3 minutes or so for comments so that we can wrap up after that. And again, with these comments, we won't necessarily respond to them in the moment, but we will follow up. We are recording this, and is it still being recorded? Okay. So, we have an FAQ on the portal that we're adding to with questions as they come up. We're trying to put answers there so that there's an organized place for people to see answers to questions we keep getting. But having said all of that, I will, Rick, I'll welcome you to leave us with a comment. Thank you.
Okay, yeah, hear me okay?
Rick, we can't hear you.
Can't hear me.
Oh.
Yeah, I'm not
okay.
muted.
We got you now.
Yep, that's on our end. Sorry about that.
Okay, thanks. So I'm going to address just a quick couple of things about biodiversity, and just for background information. So I've been a conservation biologist, professional conservation biologist for a long time, 40 years plus. I have worked with state, federal agencies, state agencies, nonprofits, TNC especially, doing things like especially drawing up conservation plans, biodiversity conservation plans, for small places, for regional plans, for statewide, regional New England plans, all sizes, all kinds of things. That's basically my background, and that's to me, the process that you're going through right here, as it is supposed to, is generally involved with the preservation of the state's biodiversity, Vermont's biodiversity. That's what the act says. That's what sort of like the main point of the act is, and there is, based on that, there is. It's just, it just shows, that there is really very little understanding of what that really means. First of all, there's no definition of biodiversity in the Act, nor in any publication that you're reviewing, involved with this, or anywhere. I doubt if after 40 years of, experience in this field, I know for pretty much for a fact that, there are very few of you, if any of you, who could really expound upon what biodiversity is. And so that definition is lacking. And because of that, there has been no, real identification of, there is no biodiversity conservation plan for the state, which is really the first thing you need in drawing up, this conservation plan. I mean, if that is your primary focus, so to identify what you need to put, what you need to conserve in order to preserve the state's biodiversity, full biodiversity. It's a simple thing. It's, in the scheme of things, it's the first thing you would do, and go from there. So that, really, you just simply don't have that yet. And that's really just the main point I want to make. That it's through, it's not just you, it's the conservation by design, Vermont conservation design, is lacking in providing you with the information you need. It gives you a framework, but suggesting that you need to protect, an equal percentage of a habitat or a community, in all of the ecoregions of the state, it's really just not the way biodiversity conservation is done. You need to have the broad picture, and just to begin with, and then go from there. And it's not difficult. The other part of that process, the other thing that's lacking about that is, in the definition, the definition that you want, at a minimum, is that you are interested in preserving native natural biodiversity, and that the state's natural systems and these natural ecosystems. That is what we know is the most resilient to climate change, and and provides the greatest biodiversity. Vermont conservation design also identifies habitats and communities that are not natural. They are dominated by exotic species, and those don't really fit into the picture, but then, although they are valuable and whatever, they don't fit into the picture of preserving the state's natural biodiversity. That's the focus. That's the goal. So anyway, that's my comment, and I'm not expecting anything. I'm gonna sort of write this up in a broader statement now that I know that the comment period is extended. But just just with some other ideas about how you go about doing a biodiversity conservation plan. So
thanks very much. I was going to ask you if you'd be willing to write that up, and I do want to shift to Caroline here and then to Zach. But thanks very much, Rick.
Thank you.
Thank you, Trey. Yeah, again, for everybody, Caroline Sherman Gordon with Rural Vermont, Legislative Director. So during the inventory phase, it was my experience that instead of meaningfully engaging agricultural stakeholders, representatives like ourselves got confronted with a never-ending storm of questioning about whether or not agriculture would be included in the vision of Act 59 and in the definition of natural resource management category or not, despite the fact that this inclusion is being quite evident in the letter of the law. That discussion dominated the entire engagement during the inventory phase, which was extremely disturbing and mounted simply in the recommendation that agricultural land should be included in the plan. Now, none of the agricultural stakeholders represented in the working group have been invited to serve on the TAC. And now VHCP proposes a scope of work much focused on advancing the many needed improvements for the working lands, in their recent memo, but now this process is lacking its legitimacy as neither of the stakeholders engaged is able to represent farmers, as farmer-led organizations are being excluded from this work. In an email to me, Trey Martin acknowledged that Rural Vermont's understanding that the planning process would be tokenizing participants, as it's not intended to allow for any sort of co-design, but is more so focused on information sharing. What is called regional stakeholder groups is really just a presentation with the purpose of public education rather than meaningful engagement of relevant stakeholders. This is unacceptable, and it is my hope that VHCB will recommend more appropriate engagement processes to develop new policies that better protect the working lands and make farmland more affordable, even though it is a tremendous missed opportunity that this process failed in having meaningful discourses of this sort. Neither of the objectives in the draft report would meaningfully advance the protection of farmland from development, paired with making that farmland more affordable for farmers generation after generation. Conservation of farmland is incredibly important for biodiversity, as agriculture and forestry historically have literally eradicated an overcultured habitat in the large scale. So it will be critical to create new habitats on farmland that can be integrated with agricultural use through ecological practices. This is what Rural Vermont envisions when we envision a just and equitable world rooted in reverence for the earth and dignity for all. This abundant and generous way of life celebrates our diversity and interdependence, in which communities of microorganisms, animals, plants, and humans tend one another and nurture generations to come. Conservation easements do not lower the cost of farmland or make farmland more affordable for farmers that purchased land that's already conserved, for example. The objectives I'm raising would be better served with the development of new policies instead of just advancing the financing of conservation easements. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Carolyn. Zach, you're up. And would you come back to the table? Emily's got a space there.
Folks online can hear me okay. Maybe just a thumbs up from the people who are visible. Oh, there's only one person visible. So.
Hannah, can you hear us okay?
No, she can't hear. How about now? Better? Okay. So I wanted to talk about the scope for a second here, because there are many legitimate concerns and goals that have been raised today. We need a plan for all of them. We need to address all of them. Act 59, I can say this because I was involved in writing the legislation, when first drafts of it, was not intended to address all of the things that are mentioned in the context of, right? So there's the context that Act 59 fits into. That's included within the vision, that as a part of having a healthy, viable, sustainable, affordable Vermont, one piece of that can be addressed through what Act 59 seeks to accomplish. And one thing that I'm worried about is that from the beginning of the implementation of Act 59, I don't want to ascribe intent, I don't know why this happened, but that the process that we've been a part of in various ways here with implementation has been kind of made into a plan for addressing all or many of these goals. Vermont, we heard Gus earlier mention the long desired Vermont, what was the word?
Land use map.
Land use map or land use plan. This is not the overarching land use plan, right? Even at full concept, Act 59 deals with how much of the landscape? 50%. 50% at full kind of design, right? That's the idea of Act 59. Now, not that it's not, of course, influencing and impacting the entire landscape, because the goal obviously is to have an impact on ecologically functional landscape writ large, border to border. But in terms of the permanent conservation goals that are the core of this legislation, 50% is what we're talking about. And when we are, thinking about whether there's space for all of these other things that we all know we need, more housing, more opportunities for up and coming farmers that, that doesn't involve permanent conservation. My goodness, there's space for all of these things, even in our tiny little state of Vermont. But what I think is a risk is trying to make this into the vehicle for addressing all of those needs. And that doesn't mean that there can't be recommendations or even kind of an exploration of some of the various opportunities for future investigation and continued conversation and collaboration. That would be great if those things are called out in the plan. But I think what's really important, especially with the 8 months that this group is talking about working, is how can we achieve best those goals that are called out in this plan? And in Act 59. And Act 59 did not there, but I think that's the piece of this scope conversation that I'm worried is getting left out. That it's absolutely the case that Act 59 is in the context of this broader vision, but that this isn't the VHCB plan. This isn't the Vermont Land Use Plan. This is the how are we going to, with the lens of the ecologically functional landscape, with the lens of being resilient in the face of increasing, natural disasters caused by climate change, in the lens of preventing biodiversity collapse. What are those pieces that we can accomplish through a plan focused on permanent land conservation and rebalancing how we do conservation in the state of Vermont? That's the core of Act 59. And I hope that in some ways that makes our job easier, because we don't have to bite off, we don't have to eat the whole apple in one bite. We can acknowledge that there are all of these other, equally important issues out there, but that we aren't going to be able to address all of them. Oh, this is what I was going to say earlier, is that if there are areas of the Vermont economy or the Vermont complete kind of land use regime that aren't addressed in Act 59, that was the point. The point was not to have a monster of a bill that touched everything. And so I think it's just in terms of putting this together in a way that, right, we have other last commentaries. We have Vermont already is lucky to have many plans. We have a forest future strategic roadmap. We have this is the biodiversity roadmap, if you will. And so it fits alongside with, and it's the ecologically functional landscape roadmap. It's the, how are we going to make sure that our landscape is really standing up to the threat of floods and droughts going into the future? And all of that serves our communities, right? That's the community resilience piece. That's what Bob Zano has reminded us every time he speaks, is that the community resilience piece of this is the ecologically functional landscape, because it makes all of our lives better to have a landscape that can absorb and be resilient to and mitigate these forces that are coming our way. And so that's the resilience component here. That's the community component here. So I'm excited to keep seeing this group, work on digging into, hopefully with even more precision, those major goals, the goals of Act 59. And to not in any way dismiss the importance of all of those other things that need to happen in Vermont, but to understand that this bill is not the answer for all of those things. It's maybe the first step. Maybe it's a part of the solution for those other things. So I hope that's helpful. Just additional context. Anyways, thank you.
Thank you. And we have 5 minutes left. So did anybody, Cheryl, Annette, Jael, I can't read all the names on the board. Is there anybody else who wants to say something before we break? Okay, I'm gonna take sort of moderator's privilege then to kind of close us out with a couple of reminders. And before we do that, again, I'm not, Carolyn, really good questions. we can catch up and talk more about what's coming up and how we are thinking about engagement and including what we hear from both TAC members who are just representatives of stakeholder groups and stakeholder groups themselves over the next few months. Rick, again, thank you for your thoughts about how to focus on biodiversity. We welcome further written comments. And Zach, two quick takes or hot takes I have for back at, one, I think in referring to the land use plan of the early 1970s, I don't think Gus was saying that's what we're trying to do with Act 59. I think he was alluding to how hard these conversations are. We never got a land use plan because of how hard it is to do. And that we've seen a lot of that same difficulty in engaging people in constructive ways through this because of the many perspectives on land use and how personal it is when we're talking about people's land. So, and then I think the rest of your comments very welcome. And that's what we were trying to do today is illustrate that the scope of this is an important tension point, and you're articulating a vision about scope. VCP has articulated a vision about scope. We're going to keep working on that. Happy to hear people's ongoing perspectives about the breadth of the framework itself, as well as the specific actions that manifest the way forward. We are going to, after this meeting, we're going to follow up and make sure all the documents we handed around today are online. We will certainly, if anybody has writings that they've done today in person, that you want to hand me before you leave, I'd love to collect any of your notes with your name on it so we know who wrote it. If there's anybody online, TAC members who want to send responses to prompts, we'll definitely copy out the chat and see if there's any nuggets in there, but TAC members feel free to get back to us that way. So upcoming TAC lunch sessions next Wednesday and Friday from 12 to 1. We will email about that and post it for, that we'll do 50 minutes of TAC conversation and a 10-minute public comment at the end of those. Our next TAC meeting is going to be probably the week of December 15th, but we're going to doodle the TAC to find a day that works for the most people. Regional listening sessions will be probably the second or third week of January. We want to take lots of time to get ready for those. And at the TAC meeting in December, we will be talking more about what I alluded to earlier, like a way to support through mini grants or other supports, ongoing conversations that TAC member organizations and other stakeholders want to lead to get feedback back to us about the objectives, pathways, and actions as we're in this phase. So Emily had a question. I'm happy to take any other questions. I also want to say it's 12:58, so we're going to, if people need to get up and go.
The email that came out from Annie says the 19th and 21st. Yes. But also says Tuesday and Thursday.
Oh.
It's the 19th and 21st.
It's the Wednesday,
It's the Wednesday, Friday, not Tuesday, Thursday.
That's correct, and that someone else just brought that to my attention while we were here. So
Wednesday the 19th and Friday the 21st, 12 to 1. Those are definitely opt-in.
Much optional. We know that they're pretty last minute. We just kind of decided this might be something worth offering, like as we were prepping for this meeting. And really just the purpose is to continue the conversation we had today for anyone who couldn't join us today. But I will definitely get the updated, clarified dates and times. Thank you.
We'll follow up with materials and dates and everything in a doodle poll for the December TAC meeting. So great question, Emily. Thank you. Any other clarifying questions before we adjourn? Hannah? No. Okay. I thought you had a hand up. Then I'll just say two things. One is thank you so much for being here in person or taking your morning to join us online. As Gus said at the beginning, we feel very appropriately challenged by TAC members and stakeholders to hear and see you and to really deepen the engagement. And that's what Gus spoke to at the beginning. And I want to leave you with that as a commitment from VHCB is like, this is a lot of work, but we take it really seriously. And we want to take responsibility for generating content to people to react to. That doesn't mean that we really don't want to hear, inputs, feedback, questions, comments, criticism. So we'll come back to that. The prompts for the 2 online meetings, we'll put them in the email, but remember, it's how does your vision for what you want to accomplish fit into the existing framework? What's your vision? What parts of your vision do you not see somewhere to park? Where would you like to see our framework adjusted and added to? And is there anything that's most critical for you to see reflected in the actions that manifest the goals of the plan? Thank you. We're adjourned.